We're talking about a tough subject that some people kind of want to avoid, but it's really an important one for us to tackle. It's grief. And for Becky Lamaka is from Laguna Mortuary, and she's going to talk to us about the experience that they've certainly learned over the years and what you've kind of gone through in terms of how you've dealt with folks who deal with grief. What is kind of maybe, let's jump right into it. What is one of the big misnomers about how we deal with grief?
Well, I think the biggest is that we grieve in stages, right?
Yeah, I've heard the multiple stages of grief, right?
Right. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross actually wrote a book back in the 60s on the stages of dying. And over time, it kind of transposed in these stages of grief. And that's why if you Google, that's the first thing that you see. And one of the things that we've realized probably over the past 40 years, and even Dr. Kubler-Ross herself saw this, is that grief is much more fluid. It's much more dynamic. We don't grieve, we don't feel anger and then go into the next stage, the next stage, the next stage. We feel all of these things. And if people who have experienced grief, they know this. You feel all sorts of emotions at all different times. And one of the reasons we don't like to talk about grieving in stages is because we don't want people to feel like they're doing it wrong.
Right, like there's like, I've checked that box, I'm done with this now I'm on to this one, right? And that's kind of a I'm, like you said, I'm doing it wrong, or is there a right way?
There isn't a right way. And I sure wish, I wish we could grieve in stages, and those who are grieving wish we could grieve in stages, because wouldn't that be nice to check all the boxes and then be done with it?
Right.
And unfortunately, that's not what happens, and we grieve how we grieve.
Now, you also said one of these stages that we grieve with there are secondary losses that can even be more impactful. What do you mean by that? What is that about?
Well, a lot of times we think when we talk about grief, we think about a death loss. And there are many more losses associated with a death loss, or maybe not even a death loss, that people are experiencing. We grieve if we lose our driver's license. We grieve if we have mobility issues. Grieve having to move, maybe leaving our home and having to go into an assisted living. Grieving kids going off to college. That's a big thing.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So when you're talking about, when you say grief, we think of just a death in the family, or a death of a loved one close to us. But grief can really apply to a lot of things that we have to say goodbye to, or that have have sunsetted in our lives.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I do know that driver's license issue, or moving, can really be an impact for somebody. That mobility has been taken away from them. That access to the world has been taken away.
And that is a very real loss. I think when there has been a death loss, people are grieving that death loss, and simultaneously they're grieving some of these secondary losses. I now don't have any, my spouse who died did all of the meals, made all of the meals, took care of all of the bills. And now I have to figure out how to do this on my own. And there are days when you're grieving that secondary loss more than the death loss. And I always let people know, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's maybe a guilt in like I don't have anybody to cook me a meal. And well, wait, you lost your spouse. Shouldn't that be the focus? And you're like we said, there's no right way to do that.
Exactly,
right.
Exactly. And there are days that is going to be the primary focus in your primary grief, and giving yourself that grace to say, it's okay to feel this way today.
There are a mix of emotions that you can feel all at the same time, right? Is it a kind of a strange thing to maybe feel like one of the points you make, joy and grief at the same time?
Yes, and a lot of people, that's a really hard thing, because should I laugh? Should I find joy? My brother died several years ago, and when the holidays came around, my mom really struggled with, how can I celebrate and be happy and enjoy time with my grandkids and my family when my son has died? And she felt that she needed to stay in this mourning period and could not celebrate and could not acknowledge those happy things in her lives. And we talked through the fact that we can do both. Right. It's not an either or, it's a yes and.
You can't stay in that place. It's not a healthy thing, I would imagine, to stay in that place. My wife passed away, unfortunately, back in 2015. And I remember when we were going through the process of services and those things, we'd have a laugh every once in a while. Like, she would have hated that. We kind of like, what would Shannon have said here? What would she have done here? And we had a laugh, and it felt it was a lift. It felt like a relief to just laugh for a minute,
Yes.
you know, and that's kind of people have to, I guess, recognize that that's really okay to have that mix of emotions involved in it.
And it doesn't mean that you're still not grieving. It
Right.
means that you're beginning to take that person with you on your grief journey. You're bringing that person along with you in those moments of joy and gratitude.
One of the things, there's no right or wrong way, but there is one thing you should do. You have to go through the grief, right? You can't avoid grief. That's another one of your points, right? Don't run away from it. Don't try to go around it. You have to go through it.
You have to go through it. And it's messy, it's hard. I would never pretend that it's easy. Yet what we see time and time and time again is we need to allow ourselves to experience these feelings. We need to go through it. Rather than shutting the door, throwing the covers over our head and pretending like it never happened. I tell people, lean toward people. Set your boundaries, do what you're comfortable with, yet we're also not meant to go it alone. So lean toward people, allow people to be there, not to help you, not to fix you, but simply to be present.
Well, when you're in that, I mean, like, I don't want to feel this way. I want to stop feeling this way. Isn't that one of the reactions from people? I just don't want to feel this right now.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We don't want to feel this way. Yet we do feel this way. And interestingly, when we lean into it, we feel that dissipate a little bit sooner than when we choose to try to avoid it.
And that's one of the things I certainly learned about, I think, about grief for myself is it's not, oh, I'm over it. I'm through it. And my mother actually lost her mother in the teenage years, and she'll be 80 years old this year, and she says, I still miss her every day. So I think it's one of the things, you still carry that. It's never a day that goes by where you maybe don't feel that, or there's some part of it, but it's still with you, but it doesn't have the intensity or the heaviness as it started with, right?
And I feel that you know that better than I do, right? We're all masters of our own grief, but absolutely, we learn to enfold the loss into our lives. We never recover, we can't go backward, but we learn to move forward with this loss, bringing this person with us, even though they're not physically here with us. We continue that connection, and over time, those edges of grief soften a little bit, and it's more laughter, less tears.
Now, the last point that you wanted to make sure we understood is, although sometimes it may seem impossible, we can actually get through it, right? So at the beginning, it's like, I can't do this, but people get through this, right?
We do get through this, and statistically speaking, only about 7% of people throughout the world really get stuck in their grief.
And there's growth from it, too.
And there's growth from it. I mean, think about how many charities have been started in the U.S. that come out of grief. You know, the first one that comes to my mind is Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right?
Right.
That is an individual who took her devastating loss and her grief, and she grew, and she said, here's what I'm going to do. Here's how I'm going to honor my child. I'm going to take this grief, and I'm going to harness it, and I'm going to create good in the world.
Right. Things like Race for the Cure, Cancer Walks,
Yes.
Alzheimer's groups, and all sorts of things like that come from those people. I need to do something about this.
I need to do something. And even if you're not a person who, hey, I'm going to go start a foundation, I'm going to start a charity, we still grow through that, right? We still learn to incorporate it into our lives and move forward.
Right. That's an important thing to understand, that, like you said, we get through it. And you can grow from that, and you can take what you've learned from that and actually help other people when it comes that time to be that support person as well, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why support groups are so effective, even more than therapy most of the time. It's that, again, that community, and just having somebody else who can be there to listen, who doesn't understand your particular grief, but is walking their own journey.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Becky LaMacca from O'Connor Mortuary. That was a great conversation. It's an important one to have. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, still to come up next, we have Sports Corner with Cole Young, and then later in the program, Wellness in the Woods with Leslie Coretti. Stay with us.